why are certain people addicted to certain substances? Like, why is an alcoholic not a heroin addict and vice versa?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially when there are several substances that seem to do a very similar job. But despite that, they do a different job. So I would say it's down to a few different factors. First of all, it's the situational need. So for instance, if your thing is you never sleep enough and you don't have any energy for work, heroin is not your answer, right? It's more likely to be caffeine or maybe, something stronger, amphetamines or something like that, right? So that's part of it. Part of it is also environment. So, one of the reasons that I never did, certain drugs and in fact also engaged in certain other things is because I didn't have the environment. I mean, for instance, I was so poor, I couldn't be a shopping addict. I was so unattractive to women, I couldn't be a sex addict. I was so poor that I didn't have access to computer games, like at a certain point. Do you see what I'm saying? So there is that environmental thing. And this is where often it's actually harder for people who seem to have it all materially, right? So they're good looking, they're successful, they've got lots of friends, they've got lots of money. Well, that list of things I just said make it very easy to indulge in all of the different addictions that I just said, right? Whereas, having less. Now, obviously, once someone has the addiction, they will find a way to fulfill it, right? That's famous, that you've never seen someone more motivated than an alcoholic who doesn't have alcohol or a heroin addict that doesn't have heroin. So I understand that. But I'm saying whether you actually get into an addiction in the first place is partly just if it's even available to you easily or not. And then, the other issues I would say are, the genetic and the biochemical need. So if you put that all together, how does someone end up addicted to cigarettes? They almost certainly going to have people around them smoking who they look up to or who they want to join in with or something like that. Maybe it's their family, maybe it's parents, but might well be friends or whoever. So that's the environmental factor. Now, maybe they're tempted to because they're feeling, lacking of confidence or something like that, and they feel like cigarettes will give that to them. So that's the situational need. And then maybe they have a tendency for a greater need for nicotinic acid, niacin, than most people. And the nicotine in tobacco will also hit those nicotinic receptors, and so they'll feel really good as a result of that. So it's filling a biochemical need in them, which is inborn and genetic. And then there's the habit aspect, right? They like going out for a break, a smoke break. I remember, when I used to work in kitchens, the few non-smokers would complain that they weren't allowed as many breaks as the smokers, and we would go outside. And I remember those times fondly, as much as it destroyed my health in many ways of going outside and smoking. There was a real camaraderie about it. And there are some benefits to tobacco other than hitting nicotine receptors, right? There's a bunch of them, in fact. And there's an argument that certainly not health-wise, but maybe societally, that nicotine is not such a bad drug, that it helps people to focus, it helps them to think more clearly, it energizes them. A lot of the great writers throughout the last few hundred years have used nicotine to be able to write better. It's not good for your body, but societally you could say, it's probably a good thing that it exists if, you believe that. So, these things are not always simple. But anyway, so that's one example with cigarettes. Let me give another one of alcohol, right? So situational need might be that you're feeling stressed and you're feeling tense in general. And then in the environment, someone offers you a drink, someone hands you a drink, or you see someone drinking and you can see how it relaxes them and you're, I'd like one of those as well. Genetically, you may have this tendency, as I say, towards low GABA, and maybe with, a good gene to break down the alcohol as well, the aldehyde gene, and is often a problem. And then you end up with that neurological addiction. But I would say situational need, environment, genetic and biochemical state are the key factors as to why you get involved in one and not the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. What's available, what's not available, what's at hand, etc.
And what helps you. definitely.
And what helps you.
Or
Right. Yeah.
you
Because if it
believe.
doesn't help, then right. Yeah, that makes sense. Then just to touch base, because we were, that was really on addictions. Would it be the same for compulsions? It's like it's going to be everything that you just talked about in the same boat for the addictions of whether something's going to come up like that.
Pretty much, yeah. So, and I suppose the other thing you can add in that's more likely with compulsions is just happenstance, right? So, for instance, why do you always brush your teeth before you comb your hair, or vice versa, right? Before you leave the bathroom in the morning? That may just be, it may be that someone else, your mother used to brush your teeth and then comb your hair, and you learned that's the order to do it in. But if those are, activities that you worked out for yourself, or at some point you changed them, then maybe it's just that you did it by pure happenstance to begin with. And I mean, this is the case, like often when you first go to a new place and someone asks you to take a seat, you will sit somewhere, maybe random. I mean, maybe not, maybe, closer to them or something like that. But let's say, they offer you the sofa and you go in the middle or left or right? Now, next time you're there, you're much more likely to pick the same spot again if you're a compulsive person, like most of us are, because that now feels familiar to you. But you picked it the first time, maybe based on happenstance, or here's the other crazy thing, maybe the first time you picked it because, I don't know, it was closer to flowers that you liked or further away from something you didn't like, whatever. But maybe now the flower's gone and or the things that you didn't like is gone, and you're still sitting there because you made that decision originally. And that's one, and not the only one, but that is one of the problems with compulsions. Not necessarily that the behavior is bad. I mean, I've given very innocuous examples on purpose, right? Getting up, brushing your teeth, sitting in the same seat, having the same drink in the morning in the same way. I'm purposefully not using anything that sounds bad because most compulsions are in fact innocuous. But the challenge is, what if they don't make sense, right?
Yeah, like hoarding. To be honest, like you seem like there's the OCD, the excessively tidy person. That seems like it could be very, very helpful. But the hoarding on the other side, like not very helpful behavior for a lot of reasons.
I would say that's actually your judgment that one is more helpful than the other. I mean, they are both great examples of, much more extreme compulsive behavior. Yes. Mm-hmm. But the extreme cleaning thing, I mean, I based on the way you just introduced those, I would guess that you're more on that end of things. And
how'd you guess, Owen?
And I actually agree. I mean, I am certainly in our relationship, and I like, sparse, very empty rooms and minimal stuff. And I believe everything that you own is like weighing you down to some degree. So I actually agree with you. But if I put on my objective goggles for a second, I feel, well, obviously the value of the excessive cleaning is that things are clean. But the downside is a lot of time is wasted, right? If you're doing the same thing over and over again. These days, a lot of cleaning materials are full of toxic chemicals. So you're exposing yourself and the whole environment to toxicity to various degrees. Maybe it's upsetting to other people around you. So there's a lot of downsides to it as well. On the other hand, with the hoarding thing, yeah, I mean, that can get pretty awful. And I had a parent who was a hoarder, and it was horrific. And I have a very strong emotional and visceral reaction to it. But again, I can understand their perspective. And, as much as the value of the obsessive cleaner is that things are clean, the value of the hoarder is that they have a lot of stuff which may be useful, which of course is why they're hoarding in the first place, is because that's what they believe. And so obviously there is a degree of extremeness in either side where it's just obviously bad. And, like with the Hoarders TV show, and this happens with hoarders, eventually you hoard so much now you can't find anything. Mm-hmm. And so therefore it's no longer got any utility. But I would say, if you're cleaning the same thing 10, 20, 30 times in a row, any utility from that action is pretty minimal as well, right? So that's why I'm saying I think they're both equal, roughly.
Yeah, because they're both at the opposite ends of the spectrum. Is there a direct, neurotransmitter or deficiency in something that's linked to either one of those?
That's a good question. I don't know about that, but I would put it down to feelings and emotions. And so we talked about this last episode when we talked about narcissists, and we said narcissists will orient their, the way that they behave as a result of them refusing to feel a certain emotion, right? But there is another version of that, which is not where people will completely repress a certain emotion, but more where they're organized their whole lives around not feeling a certain emotion. And this is quite often at the root of compulsiveness. And this is something that's known, I would say, in the addiction community. So what they often say is that, if you look at an addict, they're behaving maybe very badly sometimes, and they do. They lie, they cheat, and very often they lie and cheat. Sometimes they steal, and it's not great. But you have to understand that the root of that is suffering, is pain. The compulsion and the addiction is happening as a way of escaping pain. So remember, I said earlier that compulsive and addictive behavior is an attempt to escape the present moment.
Yes. Yeah.
So question, why would you want to escape the present moment if the present moment is such a wonderful place, according to all these enlightened people, your Eckhart Tolles and all the rest of it? Well, the reason is, in the present moment, and maybe Eckhart Tolle doesn't agree with this, but this is my understanding, in the present moment, there are real human feelings. And especially if there is trauma, a history of trauma and abuse and neglect, and all of that is completely unresolved, then a lot of the time there is trauma and hurt still trapped in the body. And that will come up when you're present. And so really all addictive and compulsive behavior, from my understanding, whatever, it's in a way of escaping pain. When I say it might be to address a biochemical deficiency, that's still a form of pain.
Right.
A biochemical deficiency or excess. So if you have too much cortisol, you're trying to correct that. If you have not enough dopamine, you're trying to correct that. In either case, that causes a variant of pain. And so going back to your question, some of the words for the painful emotions are, like shame, like we've talked about. But some other words are sadness, right? That's a form of emotional pain. And I would say that hoarding is really a way of avoiding at all costs feeling sadness and grief, because it's to do with letting go, right? It's like, what are you going to feel? What are you going to feel having let go of something, right? It's, for them, it feels sad, right? For you, probably not, but it sounded a bit crazy.
Well, there's certain things, that I've let go and go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have.
So they really don't want to feel that feeling. I mean, most of the actions that we consider insane or awful or whatever in the world, maybe all of them, are people's ways of avoiding various feelings. I remember I saw a video recently of a guy who lived in a certain country where this was normal. I don't actually remember which one. And, someone was interviewing him and asking him why he killed his wife. And he said, well, she went outside without my permission. The interviewer was from that culture, but he still was like, well, was that it? And he goes, well, of course. He goes, the feeling of shame of her being out there and everyone else seeing that and seeing that she doesn't listen to me. What am I supposed to do with that feeling? I had to kill her. Now, this was completely logical to him, right? Now, obviously, that's a different value system than our culture has. But my point is the lengths that people will go to avoid feeling things. And in a lot of the, especially different Asian cultures, shame is the worst possible thing you can feel, right? For them. And I would say probably the more Christian cultures, although I realize there are some in Asia, like Korea, but generally I'm talking about more like European Christian cultures. Guilt is a huge one that we don't want to feel, and that's why there's a lot of focus on avoiding that, I would say. So those are like cultural examples. So I'd say with the obsessive cleaner, the compulsive cleaner, they are trying to avoid the feelings primarily of disgust. And then second of all, also possibly of fear. But I think disgust is the primary thing. So a lot of your compulsive behavior can really be traced back to what feeling you specifically will avoid feeling at any cost. And, some people are quite gung-ho, right? And they might be like, oh, yeah, I'm okay with anger and even sadness. I cry and all the rest of it. So for that person, it may be feeling vulnerable. Or for that person, it may be feeling, something positive. Some people actually do a lot to avoid feeling, say, pride which, or I mean, maybe that's a negative word, but let's say confident, right? Because when they were young, people saw them and said, oh, who do you think you are? You're being cocky, you're being, full of yourself, all that kind of stuff. And so they learn to associate feeling confident with shame. And so now they will avoid confidence at all costs, and they don't even know why, right? And so they always keep themselves small and always keep themselves, compliant and nice, and then all the rest of it. But it's really out of fear of feeling a certain feeling again. So it's more common to just directly avoid painful feelings, but it can even be indirect. Like in the example that I gave, people will avoid feeling achievement because they don't want everyone else to be envious at them and angry at them. They will avoid feeling love because they associate it with heartbreak or whatever it might be, right? And so, but usually it's the painful feelings directly. And so whatever your painful feeling is for you, I would say one for me is guilt. And I would say that is why I try to act in a virtuous manner as much as I can, because not because I'm such I'm such a moral person really, but because I can't bear to feel guilt. It really bothers me. So, and that's also why I act in a very disciplined manner, I guess, by most people's definition, because I would feel shame if I was slave to my compulsions. I would feel like a worm, like a maggot, like a whatever, right? I would really feel worthless if I gave in to, well, let's not say compulsions. I'm not claiming to be enlightened, but I would really feel worthless if I gave into addictions, right? If I, that would feel, shameful to me, as the story that I told a couple of minutes ago. And so those are feelings that I really don't want to feel. But the problem with that from a, enlightenment point of view is that you're going to behave in compulsive ways to avoid those feelings. And even if those compulsions are totally benevolent, so let's say, not hurting anyone because you don't want to feel guilty, or not acting stupidly because you don't want to feel shameful. Those seem like good things, but from a purely spiritual point of view, it's still you avoiding being present, avoiding feeling certain feelings, which are a natural, healthy part of the human experience to feel occasionally. And so, being totally present will involve not necessarily, well, certainly not feeling guilt and shame regularly, but having no resistance or fear or avoidance of feeling those feelings, right? If those feelings come up, they just come up. You're present to the feeling, you observe the feeling, you don't judge the feeling, you don't hold on to the feeling, you don't try and push away the feeling, you're just present to it, and then it comes and then it goes again, and you have no attachment to it. I believe that is what all the presence teachers teach, including Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what I'm really hearing and understanding is that ultimately the real root causes of these compulsions and these addictions is avoiding or escaping the present moment and avoiding feeling certain feelings. And that's what's really causing these actions, behaviors to go out of control.
Absolutely. I will add in, I do think the biochemical addiction, element is valid as well, though. And so I would say, I actually wouldn't start with that belief. I would start with investigating if there is a biochemical explanation.
First.
And then if that doesn't work, which it sometimes doesn't, then look at the emotional element of it, what it is that you're trying to avoid feeling. But I think that a lot of people, again, because that is exactly the kind of thing that they do at rehab and, the 12-step programs and stuff like that. It is brilliant. But I do think the biochemical thing is the other element. So meaning, it's an odd thing to really accept that you are born imperfect. And this is, an interesting philosophical thing that I think, some religions and philosophies and political groups and all the rest of it embrace and some don't. But so it's this distinction between, are you born perfect and then ruined by the world, or are you born sinful or broken in some way and need fixing, right? And there are very strong feelings on either side about what is the case. I would say, as a result of my work with genetics, I'm now pretty convinced that the answer is you're born somewhat broken, right? You're born somewhat sinful. You're born non-perfect because you are born with all these genetic issues. I certainly
variations,
was.
expressions.
Yes, but variations and expressions that cause suffering within the
Yes.
person, unfortunately. And so I feel like it is important to become aware of that, to not assume that it's only what's happened to you since you were born that's the problem, but to get to the root of what might actually be there and then address it. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Rejuvenate podcast. If you want to watch the full episode that came from, just click on the link above. Or if you just want to watch our latest video, then click the link below. And make sure that you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you.